met up a week later at the Latin American Club and shared a margarita. And I brought all my material.
They make big margaritas.
Yeah. Yes, and they're very, very strong. So I wanted to be conscious. Yeah, we shared. We crafted my first little set.
That was Dara Kosberg. I'm Jeff, and this is Storied San Francisco. Every week on this podcast, you'll hear from comedians, photographers, journalists, and San Franciscans from all walks of life, telling stories, sharing personal histories, and trying to put into words what makes this city so special. Welcome to episode 47, part 2. In part 1, Dara described her circuitous journey to the Bay Area from her home in Massachusetts. In this podcast, she shares how she came to work with end-of-life nonprofits, like her current gig as program director of Reimagine, which kicks off tonight with its opening night showcase at the Sidney Goldstein Theater. For more info, visit letsreimagine.org. Our exhibit, which we're calling Is San Francisco Dying?, opens tomorrow at the Laundry on 26th Street in the Mission. The show will be up through early November, and Michelle and I will be on hand tomorrow night, so come see us and share your San Francisco stories. Getting back to this podcast, here's Dara.
I started doing informational interviews. So one thing that kind of came out of my time in Costa Rica was that I was working with this small organization, and the woman who runs it or ran it was amazing. One of the kind of biggest, hardest, people in the world. But we spent a lot of time kind of driving around, and I just felt like I wasn't having as much impact as I could have. And I was thinking actually about going to business school to then lead a nonprofit or help run a nonprofit. But I wasn't sure if it was really worth it, because I also felt like I've heard a lot about business school of just being kind of like a networking kind of thing, which is not really going to be that helpful given the line of work I want to work with. But I started doing informational interviews with different nonprofit leaders who had gotten business degrees to kind of get their thoughts. One of them was with the executive director of Net Impact, which is a nonprofit that was started on business school campuses. And it was for students who were interested in using business for good in both the nonprofit and for-profit sector. So both business thinking.
Socially conscious business.
Yeah. But also people who want to work in nonprofits or social enterprises and things like that.
Right.
And I did this informational interview, and about halfway through the interview, she's like, you know what, I actually have a job. It's not posted, or they were going to hire somebody, and anyways, she was like, would you be interested? And I came in, so she brought me back a week later, and I got the job right away. And then I stayed there for 5 years, which...
This is Net Impact?
Yeah.
Okay.
And so, and this kind of tying into Reimagine was for the first 3 years, I ran these very large conferences in the U.S. and Europe.
Oh, wow.
And then I worked on partnerships, developing experiential learning programs for business students and professionals who wanted to go into socially, and social and environmentally responsible work. And so I worked on all these different cross-sector partnerships with the government and companies and all their nonprofits. And it was really interesting. But I had an itch to go back to school.
But not business school now.
Yes. So I can say after working with a lot of business students, I was like, yeah, I think I've got, it was also I worked for all these MBAs. So I felt like I kind of got in my honorary MBA in terms of learning how to, do things efficiently and that kind of piece. And I was really interested in getting back into K-12 education, but I didn't want to just jump into working for another nonprofit without having my own perspective on things. Because in general, K-12 just in education in general is very political, and it's very, people have their certain, perspectives, and it's like, I just felt kind of uncomfortable, the idea of just kind of prescribing to somebody else's like idea of like how to do things without kind of having like more knowledge about kind of all the dimensions of it and how to think about it. I just wanted to like have more of my perspective. And I also just personally, after working kind of straight through, I kind of wanted a year of like just learning and
right, bettering yourself.
Yes. It's a very expensive way of bettering myself. I probably should have read more, but I went, so there's a program actually at Stanford School of Education, which is a mix of like policy and organizational leadership, but it's super flexible. And I had a friend who had done it, where you can take classes in the business school, the design school, like as well, and you kind of get to develop the program as you want. And so I ended up leaving Net Impact to do that.
Is this like a post-grad program, or?
It's a grad. It's like getting a master's.
Okay, yeah.
But it's just a 1-year program, so it's pretty intense. And I ended up actually moving down to Palo Alto for the year, which is interesting. That what I focused mainly on was like program design and evaluation, nonprofit leadership. So all of these things that have kind of fit into both Reimagine, but other things that I ended up doing. I then, through a professor, I thought I was going to work for a nonprofit. Ended up getting connected to an ed tech company. And I won't spend that much time talking about that.
This must have been early 2010s.
It was
roughly.
2011 or 2012 was when I graduated. And, it was, I did learn a lot. It was very much like, the people were super nice. But it very much reinforced my commitment to the nonprofit industry in general. I think both in learning about myself and sort of like what makes me tick.
It was almost like your trip to Costa Rica, in a way.
Yes.
It made you realize, by doing something else, made you realize what you...
Yes, exactly. And so while I was there, soon I actually then, and this kind of is my connection to the end of life space, help start a nonprofit called The Dinner Party, which is a community for people mostly in their 20s and 30s who've experienced loss. And get together in potluck dinners in people's homes to talk about it. And so while I was working full time, I also helped the dinner party get off the ground. And that was a major part of my life for about 5 years. There it was like, for the first several years, it was mostly just like, helping set up, various aspects of the nonprofit. But then I ended up focusing my work on the workplace and making workplaces more supportive for grieving employees, because what a common theme that kept on coming up at the dinner parties was like the workplace was either a wonderful anchor for people during this time or like kind of a really horrible experience.
I know from my own experience, I've been at my job 10 years and we've had 2 or 3 folks pass away from our direct staff, and there was absolutely zero support from my company. And then the other part of that is like, also I think by virtue of being there for so long, so many of the people that I work with have lost parents or siblings, or I lost a good friend. Yeah. There's nothing, and that's a shame. So you were trying to drive a wedge into that, and
yeah. So to get companies, organizations, to use times of loss as an opportunity to actually build a stronger culture and actually demonstrate. In a lot of ways, it's about loyalty. It's like I think the stories that I heard time and again from employees was that at this time where they needed the most support was the time when their company let them down. And there's not really you can't really undo that.
Right.
Especially in those first couple months, it's like if that time, that it really kind of solidifies also the person's feelings about the company and the people that they work with.
It shows a humanity. That's the way I like to kind of frame it, is like, these are things, this is a big thing we all go through.
Yeah.
And like you're saying, that isolation, I think you were talking about Reimagine. You're saying like that isolation that because of the taboos, we don't have to be isolated.
No. Well, and it's also like this idea that, I mean, obviously some people are really good at compartmentalizing their life, but let's just say the majority of people, it's like they were spending so much energy at work just trying to be normal. And that amount of energy, like they could have been using that for other things that would be much more productive. And it's like if they just had felt, given permission to kind of be where they were at, and giving just like more flexibility and space, and like, it's like, let's just by saying like we're gonna ignore this, it doesn't make it go away. It's like so I spent a lot of time in that work just like interviewing people on sort of all sides of this to try to understand like why were people failing other people at times when they needed the most help. Just as kind of leading into the connection with Reimagine, was that, so Reimagine was actually born out of a project at IDEO, the design firm. And they have an open IDEO platform, which is a platform where they crowdsource ideas around different social and environmental issues. And they did one on redesigning the end of life. And the dinner party, we were participating in the challenge, and I got reconnected. I'd known Brad Wolf, who's the founder and executive director of Reimagine, and he had come up with this idea of how to both use the arts to explore end of life, but also how to address a lot of the kind of stigma around this. And that even though there are a lot of like online resources, more and more around end of life things, that ultimately what he found was for people to kind of break through into like kind of these harder conversations about this, that in-person connection was a really important component. And so came up with this idea of having 1 week where like a whole city is engaged. The first year was back in 2016. And there were about 30 or 40 events that happened that first time, including an event that I put together for the dinner party, which was a 40-person dinner or 80-person dinner party where the topic that was discussed was times when people or a community showed up for you in a time of loss or didn't, or a time where you felt like you didn't show up for somebody else. And what was really cool was that it was about half dinner party people who were already in the community, and then half were just from the community, and it was really intergenerational. And I just thought it was a really like powerful event. And, a lot of more people got involved from the dinner party just from that. But then Brad spent about a year raising money and going through the process of actually forming.
Like breaking off from
IDEO to create like a new nonprofit. Okay. Yeah. And so...
Sorry, what time what time of year in 2016 was your...
It was April, I think.
Okay.
Or was it October?
2016. 2018 was April, for sure.
Yeah, but I think it may have been... I'm trying to remember. I think it was the fall. Okay. And I might be... Or
so
maybe
then fast forward a year to the hot tub up in Mendocino County.
Yes.
No, but get us from... So you did that still as part of Dinner Party, under the banner of this this kind of incubator, first Reimagine. Then how did you bridge?
Yeah, so then I was I was for working part-time on the Grief in the Workplace program, and I reconnected with Brad, and things were starting to heat up with like finally got in, nonprofit status funding, and it was like, okay, there's plans for this festival in April of 2018. And we had this actually talk in the driveway of my house, and and he was just kind of describing everything that needed to happen. And I was like, wow, this sounds really similar to my work at Net Impact. Like thinking about like, how do you set up a structure for outreach and, kind of thinking programmatically. And then also just like thinking about my background in, arts. And then I was also doing comedy at the time. I just started really getting into comedy, and I was like, I'd be really interested in working on the arts programming. And so I at first just joined as a part-time person, which quickly then became my more than full-time.
Can we back up real quickly, because we've kind of glossed over your comedy?
Oh, yeah.
But I feel like those...
Yes. No, there is this conflict. So earlier that year, so I guess in 2006... Yeah, in May of 2016 was when I went to my first open mic. And...
Where was that?
At Brainwash.
Okay.
And...
R.I.P.
And, throughout over the years, I would go through these periods where I would just like write little anecdotes, little things. And, again, I didn't necessarily have like a big plan of like, I'm going to do stand up, but this was just like kind of like these things were coming up. And, I had hosted a talent show at my house and dressed up as my grandmother and emceed it as my grandmother. It was really fun. And, I loved giving wedding toasts and things like that, and got, positive feedback from that. But basically, in just connecting into end of life loss, I had been in a fairly serious relationship that ended fairly abruptly. I mean, it's kind of funny and sad, but basically, like, he met my 8-month-old nephew and realized that he was like not ready for any type of commitment. So I was pretty devastated. And I kind of, during that time, I was like, well, what do I have control over? What do I, the only thing I have sort of control over is like what, things I can actually do. What have I wanted to do that I just haven't done? And I called my friend and I said, in 2 weeks, I'm going to do open mic at Brainwash, and you're going to hold me to it. So I knew I needed that accountability. And we met up a week later at the Latin American Club and shared a margarita. And I brought all my material.
They make big margaritas, like in pint glasses.
Yes, and they're very, very strong. So I wanted to be conscious. We shared. We crafted my first little set. And I
want to give that friend a shout out.
Oh yeah, Sam Johnson.
Thanks, Sam.
Yeah, Johnston. She's awesome. She is actually still my official comedy coach. She's, not in comedy formally, but I think she's very funny, and I trust her. So I went, and there was somebody there who was producing a show at Tommy T's Comedy Club in Pleasanton. And after my 3-minute set, he's like, can you do 10 minutes in 5 days at Tommy T's?
Jesus. You're like, piece of cake.
And I'm like, I'm not one to say no. So I told 10 friends, and I got maybe 10 friends to come out for it. And I was, nervous is like
perspiring.
Oh my God, no. And I still had note cards and
but that's awesome.
Yeah.
Also,
but the funny thing is there was another comedian who was telling us when we go on, and I was just I was standing with him, and I was so nervous. And this is where my work in the nonprofit, kind of arts education folks, I was like, can you give me, can I have a hug? Because I was so nervous. And he was just like, okay, bring it in. And then he was out. He just disappeared. I think I just weirded him out. I don't know. It was inappropriate of me to ask. But I was so nervous. But I will say one of the highlights of that is that I ended my set by saying, because I'd mentioned something about I have 2 cats, Sammy and Biscuit. Hey guys. And I ended the set by saying, if you want to see pictures of my cats, come find me after the show. And some man actually some middle-aged man just came up to me and was like, I'd like to see them. And that was it. And so I actually got to show pictures of my cat.
Oh my God. There's 7 jokes written into that line right there. Okay, so that was Tommy T's. Wow. Kind of a big deal. And how did you went from 3 minutes of an open mic to 10 minutes. That's a huge leap. I've never done comedy, but I have an idea.
Yeah,
I've done live events.
For years I'd been writing stuff. So it wasn't like I wrote all new stuff. It was, I hadn't crafted it in the sense of this is how I'm going to perform it.
But you had some jokes at the ready.
Yeah, I had concepts that I could play with that I thought were funny.
Okay.
And so
how did you feel after that? About comedy after that show?
I was super excited, and then
that euphoria, literally post-show euphoria, I'm sure, but that sustained itself.
Yeah,
cool.
Yeah, and I think I in some ways I don't know a bigger joy than I've ever had from shows that kind of post or just during this kind of feeling like I'm in my flow and there is and I think part of it because there is this anxiety that happens beforehand, but in the last 6 months or so, I still get anxious, absolutely, but it's much more manageable. Yeah. And so I'm enjoying it more.
Would you, for me, I've never done comedy, but I've done some public speaking stuff. Yes, anxiety, and then you start, and it's simultaneously out of body and super in your body. You are super in control, and you're just going with there's a flow that just kind of takes over, and I think that's the out of body. It's it's
I kind of black out. It's
surreal as hell.
Yeah, I don't. You might be able to tell already on this podcast. I'm not always the most eloquent or to the point, but it's kind of amazing to me that even in that sort of light shining in my eyes and I kind of just go into this other space where it kind of just flows and and I have to remind myself when I get really nervous that the chances are is that it will probably come together. I do practice. I write everything out beforehand. I time it. I do first, kind of thing. But often I don't rehearse a ton because, part of it is it's actually so nerve-wracking rehearsing. Yeah. But I make sure I can say it at least. I'll get to a point where I can say it pretty. I know I can get through it.
Do you have any comedy performances? I know you got Reimagine, but do you have any scheduled comedy performances right now?
Yeah. So during Reimagine, I actually have 2 shows. One is at the Punchline, which will be on October 29th. Called Good Grief, and it'll be a mix of comedians from San Francisco and other parts of the Bay Area talking about death and loss. Sure. And then we are also partnering with the Cal Academy of Sciences on their Nightlife event, which is on the 31st so Halloween. And the title of that show, a little still TBD, but will be ghost stories, experiences kind of with the afterlife and things that haunt us. So it'll be stand-up and storytelling about true stories. What
other Reimagine programs, and don't worry about choosing this over that or but what are you excited about?
Yeah. So
maybe 2 or 3 things.
Yeah.
From the how many total?
It's probably going to be close to 200 events.
Jesus. Okay. Well, that's easy. Just pick 2 or 3.
Well, one I definitely want to highlight is our opening night, which is at the Sidney Goldstein Theater, which is formerly the Norse. And it's a kind of a showcase of the different kind of things that you might see kind of going into Reimagine. And the author, Anne Lamott, is going to be interviewed by Anna Sale from Death, Sex, and Money podcast, and I think that's going to be really great. But then there's going to be musicians, artists. There's going to be people who work in the end of life space, but kind of in interesting conversations and performances. And that's on October 24th. And then honestly, I'm kind of excited about the different comedy shows that are going to be happening. I'm also just excited about so one of the big parts of my job and the program team's job is doing some matchmaking across partners. So like, for example, we're going to have some events at the Boys and Girls Club, and the Walt Disney Family Museum actually does these free workshops on stop action like film, where they actually go to sites and bring equipment for like enough for 40 people in teams to create something. And so the person who runs their behavioral health program is going to help frame the films that they're going to make are around the end of life topic, and then we're going to be able to feature them at the Laundry, which is our kind of event hub throughout the week, just as a place for people to connect. And we'll be having programming, including yours, Jeff, which I'm super psyched about. Oh, and then the closing is actually really awesome. So on the November 3rd, we're going to have an intergenerational dance party down at Civic Center. So it'll be seniors and young people, and it's just really us. Yeah, kind
That's
of
midlifers.
First, yeah. And then there's going to be a closing ceremony that should be pretty awesome too. I guess just shout out for Reimagine in general is that there's pretty much something for everyone in the lineup. Like, and so either, kind of more wellness events or grief events to art, concerts, like it's wherever you're at, there is like some, I think, place that you can tap in. And I would just say that if you're even on the fence slightly, that you should just try it. Because I think just of what I've seen from the past couple of festivals, it's a pretty special experience to go someplace where people are actually very comfortable being vulnerable and open and talking about something that is often pretty hard to do, but it's somehow easy to do in this context.
That was Dara Kosberg. Join us next week when we'll hear from sculptor and public artist Brian Goggins. Music for the podcast is by Otis McDonald. Film photography is by Michelle Kilfeather. You can find all episodes on our website, storyedsf.com. While you're there, please help support what we do by going to our store page and choosing from several different pledge levels. Please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And you can now subscribe on our YouTube channel. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, please rate and review the show. And if you have any feedback for us, our email is storyedsf@gmail.com. Thanks for listening.